Call of the Wild by Jack London. Chapter 1, Into the Primitive. Trouble is brewing in California. Gold has been discovered in the Arctic, and everyone is rushing to the Northland, looking to cash in on the find. Men are looking for big dogs strong enough to toil endlessly and withstand the bitter cold. Enter Buck, one such dog, and the main character of Jack London's tale. Buck lives in the home of Judge Miller in Santa Clara Valley. The house is large and spacious, and the grounds are beautifully laid out with orchards and gardens. For his entire life, Buck has lived here in splendor. Other dogs are present, but Buck is above them all. Buck is the king of his domain, believing himself the benign master of everyone, including his humans. He is neither a house dog nor a kennel dog but goes where he wishes. The whole realm belongs to him. He escorts the judge's daughters on walks, he hunts with his sons, carries his grandchildren on his back. A mix of St. Bernard and Scotch Shepherd, Buck weighs only 140 pounds. He is not as large as his father was, but he carries himself like a king. Hunting and walking keep him fit, and he rejoices in sport and play. Unknown to Buck, he is in danger. Manuel, a gardener's helper, has amassed a large gambling debt. His salary can barely support his large family, and there is little left to help him. One night, when the judge and his sons are gone, Manuel takes the unsuspecting Buck on a walk. They arrive at a flag station where a man is waiting for them. Money changes hands, and Manuel ties a stout rope around Buck's neck. When the stranger tries to take the rope, Buck growls, and the rope tightens, cutting off his breath. He flies violently at the man, only to be choked repeatedly. Despite his fury, Buck is thrown into the baggage car of the train. He has another struggle with the man, biting his hand quite badly. The man tells the conductor that Buck is being taken to San Francisco in order to cure his fits. Later that night the kidnapper complains about the job to a saloon keeper, insisting that he wouldn't do it again for $1,000, much less the $50 that he was paid. Buck was fitted with the brass collar and thrown into a cage. Throughout the night, he wonders why he is there. His pride is wounded, and he wants the judge to come for him. The cage is switched to an express train that will reach Seattle in 2 days. Occasionally Buck is harassed by men who poke sticks at him through his cage. He is given nothing to eat or drink, and his discomfort only augments his wrath. He vows never to let another rope be placed upon him. When the train is unloaded, a man in a red sweater approaches the crate, as 4 other men look on. The man carries a hatchet and a club. First, he uses the hatchet to break open Buck's crate. Anxious to loose his pent-up fury, Buck leaps at him and is struck by a club, a new and horrible experience. Mad fury drives Buck, but each time he rushes the man, he is struck again, until he is beaten and bloodied. At last he can no longer rise. The red sweater genially tells him to mind his place, pats his head, and provides him with meat and water. Buck is beaten, not broken. He has learned not to fight a club. Other dogs arrive and undergo the same process. Buck respects the red sweater, but he is too proud to seek the man's affection, as other dogs do. Men arrive who take the dogs away. A Canadian man named Perot catches sight of Buck and believes he is 1 in 1,000. He purchases him, along with Curly, a good-natured Newfoundland. He takes them to a ship, where they are turned over to Francois, another swarthy French-Canadian. Here, there are 2 other dogs, a white one, who is treacherously friendly, and Dave, who seems completely disinterested in everything around him. The boat ends its journey and Buck steps into a colder climate. He sees his first snow, and he does not understand what it is. Chapter 2, The Law of Club and Fang. On Buck's first day on the Daya beach he sees that he has been flung from civilization into confusion and chaos. He must always be working and alert among the savages who know only the law of club and fang. Attack is a constant threat. The good-natured Curly is killed simply for trying to make friendly advances towards a husky dog only half her size. The dog takes her down with efficient, quick technique. Once it is certain that Curly will not rise again, the rest of the dogs in the camp attack and kill her. Spitz, the lead dog of Buck's team, laughs. Buck hates him bitterly. He has learned that fair play does not exist, and he resolves that he will never go down. The first time he is harnessed to the sled, his dignity is hurt, but he is too wise to rebel. Dave, an experienced wheeler, nips at Buck whenever he is making mistakes. Spitz growls at him warningly from his front post. Buck learns quickly from these two dogs, and Francois is pleased. Two more huskies, Billy and Joe, are added to the team. They are brothers, but very different. Buck receives them as comrades. Dave ignores them, while Spitz attempts to dominate them both to establish his position as lead dog. Billy immediately submits, but Joe refuses to back down, and Spitz is forced to leave off. Soon another husky, Saul Lex, arrives. Like Dave, he is non-committal and expects nothing from anyone. Buck soon discovers the only thing that will move Saul Lex. Buck accidentally approached him from his blind side, and he is given a vicious cut in return. He learns quickly not to repeat the mistake. When Buck tries to sleep at night, he is unable to find warmth. After wandering around the camp, he decides to see how the team is making out. He comes across Billy buried in the snow, proceeds to make his own hole and fall asleep instantly. When he awakes, he instinctively forces his way out of the snow that has gathered over and around him. Without realizing it, he has begun to draw on the ancestral knowledge that is his birthright. Perrault and Francois are very glad to have Buck. When the dogs are harnessed, Buck marvels at the change in Dave and Saul Lex. They are no longer passive, but excited and ready to work. More dogs are added, and they all lose the look of unconcern as soon as the sled is moving. Buck is still learning, but soon the whip snaps less frequently. The journey grows more difficult as the dogs have to break their own trail. Every night in camp, Buck is exhausted. He is bigger than the other dogs, and though he receives a larger ration, he never feels satisfied. Once a dainty eater, he has lost all fastidiousness after he being robbed for eating slowly. He duplicates the actions of Pike, a new dog, by stealing a whole chunk of bacon. He is not caught, and another, weaker dog is punished in his place. Buck's theft marks him as fit to survive in the Northland environment. Property and personal feelings can no longer be respected. He does things because they are necessary. He acts not on reason but on instinct. Buck speedily develops more heightened senses, hardened muscles, and an iron stomach. He becomes the son of his ancestors, and when he howls at the moon he repeats the same ancient song they sung before him. All of this comes about because a gardener's assistant did not earn enough to support his family and his gambling habit. Chapter 3, The Dominant Primordial Beast. Buck's beastly nature steadily grows, though he makes not sign to betray it to the others. He picks no fights, concentrating solely on getting through each day as best he can. Sensing a rival, Spitz never misses an opportunity to remind Buck of his place. Many times he attempts to start a fight that must end in one of their deaths. Buck resists his growing dislike of Spitz until one particularly difficult and cold night, Spitz takes over Buck's nest while he has gone to eat his ration. Furious, Buck leaps at Spitz. Francois discerns the cause of the argument, and cheers on Buck. Suddenly everyone realizes that 4 of 5 starving huskies have invaded the camp. They pounce on the food, crazed by its smell. The team has never seen such dogs. Gaunt skeletons with eyes and fangs. The strange huskies attack, and Buck finds himself viciously fighting for his life. Just as he kills 2 of the huskies, Spitz treacherously attacks Buck from the side. Buck shakes him off and concentrates on driving off the strange dogs. The men are forced to concentrate on defending the food. The team takes flight into the forest, where they regroup to return to camp. All are terribly wounded, and the sled harness is a mess, having been chewed in various places. Half of her food is gone. Despite these hindrances, the team sets out on the toughest part of the trail. Francois is worried that the dogs will develop madness because of their wounds, but Perrault refuses to cattle them. It takes 6 days for them to travel 30 miles. Occasionally they break through the ice, and the dogs have to be thawed by fire. Perrault is relentless. He cannot be daunted, and wants to clear the 400 miles to Dawson as soon as possible. Several times the sled is almost dragged under the ice, but each time Perrault manages to get them over the next crest. Buck's feet give him trouble, for they have softened in the generations since his ancestors roamed the forests. Francois makes Buck 4 moccasins, which he uses until his feet grow tough, and they are thrown away. One of the newest dogs, Dolly, becomes mad and attacks Buck. Buck flees and eventually races back, relying on Francois to save him. Francois kills Dolly with an axe, and Buck collapses, exhausted. Spitz takes advantage of this moment of weakness and attacks. He is driven off by Francois, who administers a severe lashing. Perrault believes that Spitz is going to kill Buck, but Francois insists that it is Spitz who should be afraid. Everyone seems to know that the fight is drawing nearer. Buck wants it. He craves it because it is in his nature. Like the others, he has learned the pride of toil, and this pride threatens Spitz. He interferes when Spitz disciplines other dogs. He cares more about undermining Spitz than anything, and once he is soundly punished by Francois for protecting a malingerer from Spitz's punishment, the solidarity of the group is destroyed by Buck's clever undermining of Spitz's authority. The team arrives at Dawson, and Buck marvels at the sight of the dogs, everywhere working. He meets a few dogs like himself, dogs from the Southland, but most are wild huskies. Each night the dogs howl together, singing an ancient song which harked back through the ages of fire and roof. A week later the team leaves Dawson. Perrault is carrying urgent dispatches and he is determined to set a record. They travel speedily and well, but Francois must work extremely hard keeping order. Spitz's authority has been destroyed, and constant petty fights must be whipped off. One night the dogs spot rabbit, and they chase after it, joined by a nearby pack of 50 police dogs. Buck, leading the pack, rejoices in the hunt, all of his instincts overwhelming him. Spitz, cold and calculating, takes a different route to head off Buck before he can reach the rabbit. Spitz jumps upon the rabbit, and without thinking Buck leaps upon him. He knows that their time has come. This is a fight to the death. At first Spitz clearly betters Buck. After a few moments Buck is covered in blood, while Spitz is untouched. Spitz is an experienced fighter, but Buck possesses imagination. He tricks his rival, and is able to break both forelegs. Spitz is beaten. Buck knows that this is no place for mercy. He knocks Spitz onto his back and the 60 dogs rush in to finish him off. Chapter 4, Who Has Won to Mastership? Francois discovers that Spitz is missing and praises Buck. As the dogs are about to be harnessed, Buck trots up to the spot that Spitz occupied. Francois brings Alex to the position of leader instead. Buck is furious and springs upon him. He will not let Francois harness the team. Francois retaliates by bringing in a heavy club. Bitterly snarling, but remembering his lesson at the hands of the man in the red sweater, Buck stays just out of reach. Both men try to catch him, but Buck will not relent. He wants the leadership. After an hour, Francois finally throws down the club, and makes a place for Buck in front. Francois is surprised and thrilled to learn that Buck excels at leading, whipping the rest of the team into shape. Buck forces Pike to carry his share of the load, and he soundly punishes Joe for his bad behavior. At the Pink Rapids, they pick up 2 new dogs, Teak and Kuna, and Francois is astounded by how quickly Buck breaks them. They make record time back to their starting point, and the whole team struts proudly through the town. After receiving their orders, Francois and Perrault leave the team in the care of officials, a Scotch half-breed, and pass out of Buck's life for good. The work is now strict and heavy, as they are pulling the mail carts back over the trail to Dawson. Life is monotonous. Feeding time is the focus of each day. Buck quickly achieves mastery over the other dogs. He loves to sit in front of the fire and dream. Sometimes he dimly recalls memories from his California home. More often, he is visited by visions of an ancient life, his place with ancient humans. He sometimes thinks he sees a man, different from men today, and he remembers the rustle of beasts and the readiness for the fight. They reach Dawson, and rather than the usual 10 days of rest, they have another load of mail only 2 days later. The way is much harder this time, for it has begun to snow. The men are good to the dogs, feeding them before they eat themselves. The strength of the dogs is quickly waning. Dave becomes terribly ill, but refuses to stop pulling the sled. The driver puts Solek in his place, meaning to allow him to run easily behind the sled. Dave cannot stand to see another dog doing his work. He runs into the soft snow beside Solek, trying to resume his usual place, yelping in pain. Finally he falls behind the sled, but at the next stopping place he once again attempts to resume his place. Finally the driver decides it is kinder to allow Dave to pull, for he will die either way. During his final pull, he often falls and is caught in the traces of the sled. The next morning, Dave is too weak to rise. The team is driven ahead some ways, but they cannot ignore the gunshot that rings out. Buck and everyone else know what the shot means.